just to get a sense of your guys' experience, I know, Marco, I heard a bit about yours, right? But Abhishek, do you play a lot of poker? Do you study poker much, or?
I do sometimes.
Okay.
And I've just started out playing.
Just started playing.
Yeah.
Cool. Have you guys have looked at charts, solvers, that kind of stuff before? Yes, a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, cool. Today will be a bit more intermediate / leaning a bit advanced. So just pause me and jump in with any questions as you do have about this, but really going to be covering kind of a concept that I actually started studying in my own regard pretty recently. If any of you guys have been following the GTO lab guys as well, they cover this a bunch in multi-way pots and how EV gets transferred. Ike Haxton, so one of the best players in the world, has a dedicated multi-way mastery course that's also really, really good and goes super deep into this. So today we'll kind of be touching more a little high level, but really covering why multi-way pots really break heads up heuristics. As soon as you have more than 2 people in a pot, why even playing perfect GTO can really sort of result in you losing EV in some scenarios, and it's out of your control because it really depends how other people are playing. This concept of EV transfer and this principle of sandwiching. So when you're playing, specifically when we talk about multi-way today, we're going to be looking at 3-way pots. And in 3-way pots, there's always a player that's kind of sandwiched in between 2 other players, and we'll talk about what that means, how that changes ranges and strategy, and then I actually didn't have time to prepare the sandwich game, so unfortunately there won't be a sandwich game, but it'll just be interactive. We'll do some Q&A, and then we'll start there. We'll go from there. So multi-way pot fundamentals, I think what you guys will find, especially in low stakes live and online, a lot of your pots, especially going to the flop, are going to be multi-way. Most solvers were built around heads up primarily, and only, I would say, in more recent memory have they started to build multi-way solvers. But I would say it's still kind of this wild west where the solvers are trying to become better at truly solving multi-way. And when you have now 1 or 2 or many more people acting in non-GTO strategies, it really can kind of fumble things up. So some general principles, and I'll asterisk some of these, but generally speaking, when you're in multi-way pots, c-betting on the flop as the initial raiser is going to go down. You're just contending against more ranges. I put an asterisk because actually there's scenarios where actually it goes up. So don't get necessarily married to this fact that c-bets go down, and we'll cover those. One big thing is bluffing is heavily impeded. So you're going to see a lot less bluffing. If you are bluffing, blockers become a lot more important. Nut advantage becomes really important, but primarily it's just you've got the burden, the defense burden gets shared between multiple players. So bluffing 1 player versus bluffing 2, 3, 4 players, there's a lot. Even if a couple people fold, you still have to get through everyone if you want to try to bluff 4 ways, for example. So today we're going to really try to understand how EV is transferred multi-way, how this impacts our ranges, how this changes c-betting frequencies, sizing, etc. So I guess just start with a couple core fundamentals of multi-way pots. Generally speaking, and this especially applies pre-flop, but really across the entire hand, as more players enter the pot pre-flop, we need to proceed with caution. And I'll see this commonly actually where some people will do the opposite, especially beginner players, because they think that they have better pot odds now with more players calling. So they're actually calling sometimes even wider than they would normally if it were just heads up. But primarily, we need to be tightening up our pre-flop calling ranges when it goes multi-way. For example, when under the gun opens, middle position calls, and then we're in the button or even the big blind. Generally, our ranges are going to be tighter to want to enter this pot. Offsuit hands and marginal suited hands really go down in value. So they lose a lot of value. We really want to go towards, especially post-flop, we're talking about drawing hands and nutted hands, nut potential hands really go up in value, or they gain value. I mentioned bluffing is really impeded, so bluff EV collapses really, and because the defense burden is shared. Position becomes really valuable because you're not just getting information on one player when you're in position, but now you're getting multiple data points of information with many people either checking or betting before you. So that positional advantage is extremely valuable. And on pre-flop specifically, 3-betting ranges become more linear as opposed to polar. And we'll look at an example of pre-flop to showcase that. Any questions on this, on just general multi-way fundamentals? Yes?
Maybe, what do you mean by defense burden? Can you precise that?
Yeah, so it just means the burden of defending against bluffs gets shared across all the players who are in a pot. So let's say you, me, and maybe Marco are in a pot together. If you decide to start bluffing, you're not just trying to bluff me if it were heads up, but you're trying to bluff both of us. And the effectiveness of your bluff is going to go down because you have to get through 2 ranges on whatever board that you're playing. So there's more people that can kind of band together to defend. Like even if I fold, I can fold potentially a little more liberally, knowing that Marco maybe behind me might also have a good hand and can call. So you can't just necessarily be bluffing, you know, just like a maniac. Cool. So equity and sort of range principles, I mentioned kind of offsuit hands really go down in value. So hands that do gain value are sort of good suited connectors, suited aces, things that can draw to the nuts. Your lower marginal suited hands suffer from potentially reverse implied odds where you can get like flush over flush sort of scenarios. So you really kind of want to have hands that can make the nuts. So I mentioned hands that lose the value, all these offsuit broadways, things that could be dominated. And yeah, generally equity collapses when more ranges share the board. So equity overall gets split, like a chunk of the pie. Just think of this whole pie that has, you know, 100% equity that's at the start of the hand. When it's 2 players, that might get split between 2. As you add more people, you keep carving out of this pie. And so even when you're starting with like the best possible hand, let's say a hand like pocket aces, but you're against 4 other players, right? You're playing kind of against 4 other opponents, like you're still not gonna have the majority equity share even with the best possible hand. So most hands, almost every hand is generally going to lose value multi-way as more players enter in. So just something to consider. So let's take a quick look at pre-flop ranges first before we go into flops. So this is a button range versus under the gun open. So under the gun has opened, we're 50 big blinds effective, and under the gun is opening off something like 17% of hands. And this is if it folds to us in the button and how we defend or how we choose to continue against that under the gun open. So we're going to be raising with 6.7%. We're going to be calling with 17%. Most of our calling range is really heavily on suited type hands. We've got some offsuit. And then you'll notice that our 3-betting range, so the hands that we're raising with, is quite polar. Polar meaning we're going to have our best hands, aces, kings, queens, ace, king. And then we're going to have a mix of pretty dusty hands that have some blocker properties, but ace 5 suited, ace 6 suited, king 5 suited, king 7 suited, some suited connectors. And then a lot of the hands that are sort of these like middling suited broadways in the more like linear part of our range, we're just calling with. So you'll see like king 10 suited, queen 10 suited, ace queen suited, ace jack suited. What do you guys think now if I change one part of the dynamic, which is, and let me just make sure I got which one I have. So now let's say under the gun opens and under the gun 1 calls. How do you think that impacts our range on the button?
Are you calling more?
You think that we at the button are now calling more?
Maybe versus raising?
Calling more versus raise. So you think raise percentage goes down, calling goes up.
Yeah, like in the same range, but calling more versus some of those raises that might happen.
Got you.
Yeah.
Cool. And then what do you think about our overall? So like this is overall continuation range is about 23, 24%. Do you think that stays about the same, but then some of our raises shift to calls to play a little more cautiously is what I guess what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
Yeah?
You could probably flat a few more things, maybe. Like call a few more things.
Okay, so you think maybe it goes from 24% even so higher, like overall?
A little bit. I think you're getting more equity to call, I guess, right?
Okay.
On the button at least. Right. Same flop.
Cool. Yes.
I guess it will shrink. We are continuing with about 20% only and
Okay.
raising a bit tighter, more with value. It's not as much polarized, it's more linear.
Yep. Okay. So you think three betting more linear, overall range is tightening. Yeah. I think I saw a couple more hands.
Yeah,
Did you- yes.
I'm taking win position, so
Yeah.
we can take the liberty of playing more hands, but at the same time, there is also more money in the pot involved, so playing more odds for us. At the same time, with another player flatting, I think the range would narrow, maybe by a few percent, and the percentage of free bet should actually maybe get closer to 8 instead of 6, 7.
Okay. Cool. So I'm hearing then generally range narrowing a little bit, but three betting range increasing, becoming more linear. So let's take a look. So it's actually much tighter, and I think this is like a core. I think I heard a couple people talk about like pot odds. We're in position and potentially calling wider or expanding our potential range, but we go from 24% to this is 16%. So like a 50%, sorry, not 50%, like a 33% decrease in our overall range. And the biggest decrease is actually in our calling range directly. So 70% down to 10%. So I think this is the really important, like if there's like one takeaway from today is I would guess that most people are playing way too loose pre-flop in multi-way pots. So really think about shedding a lot of your, like you saw how many like suited combos we're shedding here. So you're shedding like most of your suited kings all the way, now you're only defending king 9 suited plus. So really think about being tighter. So our overall three betting range is decreasing, but you do see this shift to becoming a lot more linear. So primarily, for example, Jacks was mixing against just under the gun, but now Jacks and even Jacks is a pure three bet. Tens is now three betting a lot more. You're seeing more three bets out of your suited broadways like ace jack suited, ace queen suited, king jack suited, and then you're shedding some of like your dustier sort of like bottom of your range stuff that was three betting before, like some of your suited connectors, and then your suited ace x, suited king x. Yes.
What depths are we playing with?
This is all 50 big blinds. Everything today that we're looking at charts is at 50 big blinds.
Okay.
Yeah. Good question. Yeah, Jen.
Darker red there, is that?
That's a jam.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's going to be some jamming. I wouldn't really think too much of it. It's a really small fraction. If you don't have any jams, I think it's fine. Yeah, it's like a fraction of a percent. Cool. Was there another question? No? Okay. Yeah, I had a specific. I think I had my own like flaw in this, where before I really looked at multi-way charts, I was playing in EPT Barcelona in the 5K main, and it was kind of almost the exact scenario like this, where it was under the gun opened, under the gun one called, and I knew the button ranges like just versus under the gun, and I had king 7 or king 8 suited. And so I flat in the button, and I ended up losing like a 120 big blind pot like early on like day one in a hand that I just like never should have been in, because I didn't realize I knew I was supposed to be a little tighter, and I thought it would go from like king 5 suited, like king 7 suited was still gonna be playing. But if I had seen this exact chart and not played that hand, I would have saved 5K euros and not busted. So my own personal, this is a deep personal one. But let's take a look at another example. So now we'll look at also big blind defending ranges when you're closing the action pre-flop. So big blind range, this is again versus under the gun open at 50 bigs. So against under the gun, we're defending pretty wide as we expect from the big blind. 63% call, 4.8% raise. So now I'm gonna add in a few more callers and ask you what you guys think. So we're gonna add under the gun one calling and button calling. So now there's 3 players in the pot, folds to us in the big blind. What do you guys think? How do you guys think that will impact our range, and how dramatically, if anyone wants to guess? So under the gun 1 and button are calling. So under the gun opened, and then under the gun 1 and button both called, and then it folds to us in the big blind, and we're again at 50 big blinds effective.
What was the opening size? Just 2.5?
Yeah, I think like 2.2 or something like that. Basically the GTO Wizard standard, tell you something like that.
Yeah, it feels like 100% call. I guess.
You think 100% call?
Well, at that point in the big blind, yeah. If no one raises, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, so you'd be closing the action. If you call, we see a flop no matter what.
Yeah. Oh, I guess you could raise too.
Or you could raise, yes, you could raise. Yeah, so you think 100%. So you think we go from basically playing 68% range to pretty much 100%.
All hands are option at that point, right?
Because how come? Because of the pot odds?
Depending on the player, of course, you could raise a good percentage more.
Got you. So you think we're upping the aggression, upping the continuation range. Okay. Yes, we'll start in the back.
I think it'll be less. I think probably like 40%.
40%, okay.
You'd like fold hands like, I don't know, like ace 9-0, but then peel like some shitty like connected stuff. That way.
Okay. Cool.
I think
Do you agree?
It's going to be similar to the first one you showed, where the puck was calling UTG.
Yeah.
I think the range is going to be similar to that, way tighter.
Mhm.
Because we are out of position and with 4 people in the pot.
Mhm.
Yeah. And almost obviously 0 3-bet or 0 shove and maybe even less raise.
Okay. Well, let's take a look. So it is a lot tighter. A lot tighter. So, and you guys will see again, this is the theme, and the one big takeaway is pre-flop. I think almost everyone, I know I for sure still do it, is I play way too loose in multi-way pots. But we're going from 63% call to 38%. So almost like 50% drop in our calling range. We're shedding a lot of our offsuit stuff. Whoever said ace 9 off was a fold, you kind of nailed it. That's like the literal like top of the folding range. So you absolutely nailed it on that one. Ace 9 off is a fold. You're still calling with all your suited stuff. And then you're starting to fold some of your garbage suited stuff as well. Raising is going up here, but it's really just what you'll find in multi-way pots as well. There's generally less slow playing. Just like when you're playing, like again, when you have like aces, kings, queens, you kind of want to thin the field, get to heads up more. You have more incentive to want to get to heads up post flop. So you're going to be raising it more linear with these hands that might otherwise do a little more calling when it's just heads up and potentially slow playing and trapping. So that's why you see more raising happening in this range versus the other scenario. Cool. Any questions on this? Okay. So we're going to be moving into a couple post-flop scenarios, but generally, how many people here are familiar with the concept of EV transfer in multi-way pots? Has anybody heard of this, studied this? Okay. It is, I mentioned this is like something pretty relatively new to myself as well. But generally speaking, this is like a really basic graphic, but as more people enter the pot, all it is saying is that EV shifts. And EV shifts in maybe not necessarily the most intuitive way. So we'll kind of cover a couple examples of that. But let's say you have 3 players in a pot post-flop. Player A and player B are playing perfect GTO strategy. And then player C is playing, let's say, non-GTO strategy, just kind of doing a lot of really weird, wacky plays. And we'll take, let's say, an extreme scenario where, let's say you're on the stone bubble of a satellite tournament where, you know, the top 10 players will get a seat to the main event and then 11th bus for nothing. And then player B, let's say, goes all in for like 2 big blinds. Player A, player C, yes, player A, player C both call. So now 3 players are kind of on the flop, have called pre-flop with 1 player all in who's at risk. And then it doesn't really matter what the flop is, but let's say player C just decides to bet and they're bluffing, and then player A folds. What do you guys think in this? First off, what do you guys think is the incentive in this sort of scenario, which is like heavy ICM where you're waiting for one person to exit and everyone else gets paid basically like 10x their buy-in? What do you guys think the general incentive is in this scenario? Yeah.
Check it all the way to the river.
Yeah, check all the way to the river. So both player A and player C are heavily incentivized to just check all the way down, have both of their hands potentially make a better hand than the player who's all in, and then everyone else just wins. So by player C betting, and especially by bluffing, he is torching his own EV. But not only is he torching his own EV, he's also torching the EV of the other player and all the other players in the field. So this is an example where, like, let's say player A plays like perfect GTO, which or whatever. In this scenario, it's just like, okay, we're just going to check down to the river. So by player C betting here, EV is now being transferred away from player C to player B and player A to player B, and effectively from every other player that's remaining in this pool to player B by one person playing bad. So this is an example of where we could play perfectly, but in multi-way pots, because of people either consciously colluding or just playing poorly, can result in EV being taken away from us. And I'll pause there if there's any questions on that before I cover more practical examples of this and why this matters. Okay. So what this kind of leads to is this concept of sandwich ranges in post-flop scenarios. And because these are scenarios where when we're aware of which range is sandwiched, we can actually take EV away from certain players in post-flop scenarios. So I'll talk about what that means. So the general incentive in three-way pots is that the two strongest ranges collude against the weakest range. So the two best ranges will try to collude and basically try to get the weakest range out of the pot so that the two strongest ranges can just fight against each other in a heads-up pot. How is this generally executed? So this is generally executed by the person to the right of the weakest range doing most of the betting on the flop. The other strong range is going to be playing passively quite often because they want to let the person to the right of the strongest, to the right of the weakest range to bet a lot. And then this leads to basically a drop in EV for the weakest range, where they're not going to really get to continue often because they're going to be sandwiched between two really strong ranges. They're not going to really get to check raise pretty much ever. We'll see certain scenarios where it's like hijack versus button versus big blind. And when everyone checks to the button, the big blind literally has like 0 check raises because they've got hijack who's pretty much still uncapped, button who has a strong range. So they really do get sandwiched between these really strong ranges. And there's a couple common spots that we'll cover today. But this concept becomes really important because it knows when you can effectively sort of like soft collude with another really strong range to against a sandwich player, or when you are in this sandwich position and kind of really have your own equity and EV impeded. So you have to either proceed cautiously or just fold a lot of hands that you otherwise maybe would be calling, and potentially you're over calling in these scenarios, not recognizing that you're in this sandwich position. So we'll cover some examples, but any questions on this? Okay. I know it'll make a little more sense as we go into the examples as well. But let's cover this first example. So we're now, this is about flop play and multi-way pots. So we're on the flop of 10 of spades, 8 of spades, 3 of hearts. So in this scenario, the cutoff opened off 50 bigs and the small blind calls. So that's it. But big blind folds and then we're on the flop. And then we're looking at what the small blind range is supposed to be doing on this flop. And basically it's a range check. So small blind is basically supposed to range check to the in position player, which is the cutoff. And now if I want, I'm going to change one thing about this scenario, which is we're going to add the big blind calling in this scenario. So based on what I said in the last slide, who do you guys think is the sandwiched player in this formation? Cutoff, small blind, and big blind. So effectively, who has the weakest range? Big blind. Yes, that's right. So the big blind has the weakest range. And remember how we said to basically take EV away from the weakest range, the other two players effectively want to collude. So the player to the right of the weakest range, which in this case is the small blind, is going to now be betting more. So,
On the flop?
sorry?
Even on the flop?
On the flop, yes.
So small blind would lead.
Small blind will lead, and a lot. It goes from a 0% lead to a 23% lead. And what this effectively does is the big blind can't just call with like, you're going to get a lot of folds out of like 2 overs. Like king jack off is going to fold a ton, king queen off, because it's got also this uncapped range behind them where they can't just float like any 2 cards. Not necessarily any 2 cards, but like, you know, cards with like good backdoor potential and those kind of things. So when the small blind leads with hands that like, and you're seeing like a lot of, for example, like 10x, that's going to lead. It's got ace 10, king 10, queen 10, all these offsuit 10x that's going to be leading, and that are really just going to benefit from a lot of those kind of hands folding. And then both the small blind and then the, what do we say, cutoff. The small blind and the cutoff are really incentivized to just want to play a heads up pot against each other. So yeah, so a spot where I would guess a lot of people will just like default range check as a small blind here. And for the longest time, like I'm really working on trying to incorporate these and understand these sandwich dynamics, because I default range checked in this spot a lot as well, and wouldn't even think about leading. But this is why it's important to understand who is the sandwich player, and hence like who should be the one that's kind of applying pressure. But this also means if you're playing in a 3-way pot and the small blind doesn't understand this, then that also is going to impact, that takes away EV from the other strong range, which is the cutoff player. Because by the small blind not leading, big blind's going to get to the turn or rivers a lot more often with hands like king queen off, king jack off, because the cutoff's not going to be able to bet as much either on the flop, because small blind's range is uncapped when they're not leading with some of their good hands. So they have to proceed a little cautiously, and then basically who that benefits is both small blind and the cutoff lose EV, and that's both getting transferred to the big blind player if the small blind never leads here. Cool. Any questions on this?
What happened if the board changes?
So you're going to see this regardless of the board. So this sandwich dynamic will exist regardless of the board. I would say depending on the board, the weakest range may shift. For example, if you have a flop like 5-6-4, 2 spades or something like that, where, you know, even though the big blind range is super wide, they might have more the nut advantage and like may not have like a pure equity advantage, but the equities will run a lot closer. So these are scenarios where the sandwich player might be somebody else as opposed to the big blind, depending on the flop. So that's actually how the board will impact things. But generally speaking, if it's like a board that's, let's say, more neutral, or let's say will favor the tighter ranges, then big blind player in this formation will generally be the sandwiched player. Cool. But I will give one example is where, let's say, under the gun opens, button calls, and big blind calls. And then you have a flop of 6-5-4, 2 spades. So the big blind is actually no longer the weakest range. So they're going to actually have quite a bit of leads here. And the under the gun player effectively becomes the one, even though they're initial raiser, they're becoming the one that's now sandwiched. Okay. So now we're going to look at, oh, I didn't want to expose all of that. Okay, we'll take a look. So now we're just going to look at what the cutoff range will be, and how this because this actually changes dramatically as well, based on playing heads up versus playing multi-way. So cutoff range versus small blind check. Small blind check, first off, we saw that basically the small blind versus heads up was range checking. So they still got uncapped range here. So we have to proceed pretty cautiously. If we are betting, we're choosing to bet big, but very infrequently, so only 37%. Whereas the major change in the same ranges, so cutoff range is the same, small blind range is the exact same, you just have the big blind player now, and both the small blind and the big blind check to the cutoff. Now the cutoff changes from betting 37% of the time to 67% of the time, so a lot higher, and now because they're betting at a much higher frequency, they can just go for the smaller bet. Why do you guys think this is?
Just because the frequency is much higher?
Yes, the sizing is yeah, the sizing is related to the frequency. And maybe ask why do you think the frequency is so much higher in this multi-way pot scenario?
Because the small blind didn't bet, and we want to make sure that the EV again is not too much given to the big blind. And by betting, we have a chance of the small blind is likely gonna call, and the chances of the big blind folding then is also increased.
Yeah.
I mean, we have more information, right? I mean, if they both checked, likelihood of them having something. I mean, it can be that they're sloping as well.
Right.
Sloping as well, but we do have more information.
Right. Yes. Any other thoughts, guesses?
It's just good to get folds against two opponents. Like they just have more cards that can hurt us. So
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, you guys pretty much got it. Which is first, so the small blind checked, and we saw the small blind supposed to have a bunch of leads. So now the small blind's range is somewhat capped when they choose not to lead in this formation. Two, we mentioned that generally speaking, the two strong ranges want to kind of collude to get the big blind player out. So in this multi-way formation, the cutoff still, if the small blind doesn't do his job by betting sometimes, then we still want to do a bit more betting here to get the big blind to fold. Yeah, and so just folding out some equity, folding some of these, two card hands. If we bet as the cutoff, small blind calls, big blind's going to be folding a lot of their hands that might have had like decent backdoor equity against us, for example. So that's why we're seeing a much higher bet frequency and then smaller sizing because of that frequency. Okay, so let's look at now one other scenario, and then I'm going to ask you guys to kind of like construct this or how you think it changes when we go from heads up to multi-way. So in this scenario, we're going to look at hijack versus button heads up, and then multi-way hijack versus button when big blind calls. And then the flop is queen of spades, six of spades, five of clubs. So I'll show first, which is the hijack range heads up versus the button. So generally speaking, and for those who've attended some of our heads up flop Mastery Mondays, we know that in this formation, like generally we're going to be doing a lot of checking. Late position open versus late position call. Heads up, there's a lot of checking just based on the nature of the ranges and who's got the condensed tighter range, which in this case the button does. So we're checking most of our range and then betting small with some portion of our range. A lot of hands mixing here, 40%. So now what do you guys think is going to change? How does this shift when the big blind calls and then the big blind checks the hijack? Which in this case, the big blind is basically going to have a range check to the hijack here.
Take a step, I think in this case the sandwich person is the pap, because on this flop, the big blind seems to have the most range advantage, plus the hijack with queen eye.
Okay, so you're guessing, actually this is a good place to start, which is who is the sandwich player? And so you think the sandwich player is the button?
Yes.
Because, okay, how come?
Because of the texture, like two spade and 6-5 touch more the range of the big blind versus the button,
Okay.
the plug, and then obviously hijack has all the strong hands plus all the queens and the top flush more than the plug. So that's what I think. Then in terms of ranges shift, that would be the hijack action after the big blind checks.
Yes. So then we're talking. Well, let's pause on the first one. So so you think that the button is the sandwich player because you think the big blind has a pretty strong range on this board.
Yes.
Okay. So if we were playing heads up, let's say it's just hijack versus big blind calling, who do you think this board favors? Or who has a general range advantage, equity advantage on this board?
Probably the hijack, but
Probably the hijack.
it's close.
Okay. Looks like,
I think big blind is challenge here because they have a lot of good hands, but they have a lot of bad hands too. And then the button still has like sixes, fives, ace queen. So I think hijack will check a lot and then button.
excuse me. Yes. Yeah, so in this scenario, big blind is the sandwich player. And that's largely just given that both the hijack and the cutoff are going to have a considerable amount of queen X. They also have queens, sixes, well, less so queens for the button, but at least sixes, fives. All of these hands are still present in both players' ranges. Yeah. And so, like, yes, the big blind player does have hands like 5, 6s, and some Queen X, but as a percentage of their overall range, because their range is much wider compared to these two ranges, which is somewhere between like the hijack opening range is something like 30-ish, 30, let's say 32% or something of hands, and then the button calling range is something like 18%. So it's just going to be, it's the big blind that has the weakest range effectively. So knowing that, and based on how we talked about exploiting sandwich players, who's the expected player to bet in this scenario?
Button.
Sorry.
Button.
Button, yes. That's right. So to the right of the sandwich player, so the button is expected to bet. So how do you guys think that impacts your strategy as the hijack? Check more. Yes, exactly. So we go from 39% to 28% check. So quite a big decrease in the amount that we're betting. And this is a direct function of the fact that we're trying to exploit the sandwich player and doing this sort of soft collusion. So we saw an example in the other one where we're c-betting more as the open raiser pre-flop in that small blind versus big blind versus what was it? Cutoff? Yes. And then this is an example where we're c-betting less. So that's why that was that big asterisk, because really c-betting ranges is really going to heavily depend on who is the sandwich player and where are people seated with respect to each other. So now let's look at what the button is supposed to be doing here. So this is heads up when check 2. Hijack checks 60% of the time to the button. Button is betting about 50% of the time here for a small sizing. And this is actually a general principle as well that you'll see actually kind of universally across all flops in heads up pots on flops is, generally speaking, if let's say you call on the button versus like any opener out of position to you, let's say anywhere under the gun through cutoff. If you are check 2, global frequencies is generally going to be betting about 50% of the time. So just know that, like, you're going to be kind of mixing with like a bunch of hands, and how I personally pick which hands to bet with is just purely based on suit matching. So I just find it a pretty easy suit matching. So matching suits to what's on the flop. It's a pretty easy heuristic to execute in game. So like if you're seeing, like, let's say you have King 10 suited, or let's say you have like King 10 off, you've got like King of spades and like, I don't know, 10 of clubs, or King of spades, like, or 10 of anything else. Like you want to have some sort of suit interaction, whereas if you have King of diamonds, 10 of hearts, like I would just check. And you'll see this generally in the GTO solves as well, as they're going to have a lot of these when there's like more matching suits to what's on the flop is what they'll choose to bet versus not bet. So anyways, coming back to this scenario, we're betting 50% of the time, mixing a bunch of things, checking back with some of our more like middling of range hands, like 7s through 9s, or like our suited, like strong suited Broadway, like ace highs, that kind of stuff. So now what do you guys think changes when we're in multi-way, big blind checks, hijack checks, and now we're in the button?
75%.
Gonna bet more?
Bet more. Okay. Everyone agrees? Bet more?
Yeah.
Cool. How much more do you guys think? So we were betting 52% of the time.
59? 61?
80%.
80%? You said 61?
61?
61%? Okay.
65.
65. Okay, I like it. So this one actually doesn't increase dramatically, but there are actually some really important nuances to this, which is it does increase, but percentage-wise is a couple percentage. It's almost identical in terms of like what percent of your range you're betting. The sizing is the exact same, but notably there's shifts in where your bets are coming from. I know it looks really similar, but can anybody sort of like identify some of the patterns here and where our bets are coming more from, or how our range is now behaving?
Spades.
It's subtle.
Spades are betting more.
Spades are betting more. Where are you seeing that?
Like the ace queen of those options.
Oh, like you're seeing some of the ace jack of spades, ace 10 of spades, ace 9 of spades, some of those hands betting a little bit more.
The ace deuce goes down. Like, no, never mind.
Any other guesses? Or maybe point out like anything. I mean, it's very subtle. So, but anywhere where you see kind of like small increases in frequencies or decreases. Ace queen. Yep. Ace queen is going up. Queen 9 suited. Jack 9 suited. Yep. So a lot of the queen X.
Ace queen off.
A lot of the queen X is going as betting frequency is higher. So basically what we're seeing is that a lot of these sort of like a little more mergey hands are starting to bet. So our betting range is becoming more linear. And then some of our like bluffs before, like you'll notice, like notably ace 2 suited, ace 3 suited, these kind of hands are going down in frequency. Whereas hands like pocket 7s, pocket 8s, pocket 9s, these are all going up in frequency. Our queen X is all going up in frequency. It's mixing in checks less in this scenario. So basically, we just benefit a lot by generating a ton of these folds, again, from the big blind that's coming from their like overcards. So if they've got like king 10, king jack, like all these hands that like are really tough continues when they're in this sandwich spot. When we have a hand like pocket 7s, like we're folding out a lot of equity when we bet these hands. So when we were heads up, these were hands that are like a little more, I mean, these are really mergy kind of hands that don't necessarily want to bet very often. You're going to see a lot more betting from these in this specific multi-way scenario because of the benefits of getting big blind to fold a ton of their range.
What about ace 6 suited? Is it more to do with the backdoor equities?
Ace 6 suited is really, oh, ace, which one?
8-6.
Oh, 8-6, 8-6 suited.
It's a 6.
It's a 6, yes. So it's got a pair. So again, the mergy, so it kind of, 8-6 suited functions similar to like 7s, 8s, 9s. It's kind of like this mergy stuff that you would kind of, in heads up pots, like you would check back a decent amount of the time, but just benefits a lot more from getting the big blind to fold here. Yeah.
Just a dumb question about reading this chart.
No dumb questions, but what's up?
What's the difference between like the ace king suited and the ace queen suited with the highlight? Like there's no ace king suited because I'm assuming we're in pre-flop.
Correct. So, yes. So there's no ace king suited because we would be 3-betting all our ace king suited pre-flop.
Pre-flop. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the ace queen suited
Is we would be 3-betting most of our ace queen suited. So the sliver of that, which is like, call it like 15%, 20% that we don't 3-bet,
okay.
that's what we're doing with that percentage. Yeah. Yeah. Good questions.
Hey, Victor.
Yes.
Come on.
I just wanted to ask how the sizing is not affected because we want the other player to continue with us, but we want the sandwich player to fold out as well.
Correct. So yeah, we're trying to get the sandwich player to fold,
Yeah.
right? We're kind of colluding with the other strong range.
Yeah, but wouldn't we want to like increase the like sizing a little bit so that it becomes difficult for them to continue, or it's just to any bend they're just folding?
We don't really need to because it's really hard for them to continue anyways, regardless.
Do-overs and
Yeah, so it's really hard, so we don't really need to adjust our sizing, and it's not like we're also betting with like a much higher or a much lower frequency either. Our betting frequency is almost identical, so that's why we're not really seeing any sizing changes. Peter?
Yeah. When we see so many of our hands that are mixing, doesn't that mean that that we're indifferent about how we play them?
It does, yeah. So
I'm just kind of looking at this and I'm thinking practically how to apply this while I'm playing.
yeah,
I do see the difference where some hands are going from like 30, they're betting 30% of the time to betting 50 or 60% of the time. But if we're indifferent in both scenarios, I mean, I don't know, I'm kind of thinking like, how am I practically gonna distinguish between how I'm playing heads up and how I'm playing in the multi-way, and does it even matter if the solver is indifferent?
yeah, it's a really, really good question. So Peter's kind of touching on this fact that like whenever you see mixing in solvers ever, it just shows that like the EV of these decisions is effectively like very close or like is just completely indifferent. So it's just trying to like build a balanced strategy that we're mixing between two different decisions here. I think heuristically is just understanding that we are going to want to bet a bit more mergy. So when we do have some semblance of sort of value, like personally, what I might do with this is like take some of these more mergy hands, let's say 7s through 9s, and just turn these into like pure bets. In like multi-way scenarios, some of my 6x I'll just turn to pure bets. Maybe my queen x turn to pure bets, and then I would still probably try to balance and mix it when in heads up pots. That's how I would personally do it. But again, this is like something widely debated. Even pros are like, how do you like interpret this and actually execute this in game? And I'm just giving you guys like a couple like tools or ways that I interpret this and how I'll try to implement this. But generally, when I look at like anything like this, is like I try to turn this into like, what are the things that I'm just going to simplify to like pure bets? What are ones that I'm just going to like turn into like not really betting as much? And it's much easier to remember, like, let's say I want to pick like one of these like suited ace x, and maybe I'll just like pure bet with ace 4 suited, and then I'll like check ace deuce and ace 3 suited, is kind of what I'll like to do, is like condense some of those together. But I think the concept, Peter, is kind of like what, at least understanding why the solver does what it does and how it builds on top of this concept of like sandwich ranges, and wanting to bet more mergy here is kind of the main thing. And then how you choose to execute that is kind of up to a little creative discretion, which I know is maybe not the most helpful advice when we're trying to look for like exact clear-cut answers on how to do things. But
So
yeah,
if we go back to like the 10-8-3 board,
sure.
where we went from like 0 bets to
23%, yeah.
like I don't see any pure bets. There are no pure bets there. So
No.
we're going from always checking to trying to like mix in some bets, but all of those bets are indifferent compared to checking. So would we be giving something up if we just still checked 100% of the time?
So it would do kind of what we mentioned, which is take away EV from us and also the other cutoff player, and it's just transferring EV to the big blind. So yes, I would say most players and like are just going to be range checking here as a small blind, but just understanding that it is effectively transferring EV to the big blind. They're going to get to see more turns for free whenever the cutoff checks back, and that's a big advantage for them.
But other than just saying, like, I mean, I don't know how you would implement this. Maybe I would just say, like, well, I'll bet all my 10s, and that's it. Like, would I be missing out if that's what I took away from this? Just every time I flop a 10, I'd lead, and everything else I just still am checking?
I think that is a really good starting point. And I think like if we know we want, like, because like leading your top pair is at least feels a little more intuitive than potentially leading some of this other stuff, or like leading like an 8x, or like maybe some like of these like backdoor like flush draw kind of stuff that feels a little uncomfortable out of position in a 3-way pot. So I think that's a good way to start. Yeah, I think ideally, like, as long as you're building some sort of leading strategy in these spots, it is a good start, because it is preventing kind of like EV transferring and leaking to the sandwich player, and that's generally going to benefit you. And when you're getting a lot of these like overcards kind of hands to fold, if you want to play kind of like a pure strategy to start as you're experimenting, I think it's okay, and it's things that I've done as I get a little more comfortable with the spot, and then I'm like, okay, now how do I mix into this so that I just don't get purely exploited? Because if you're only leading, if I know you're leading purely like 10x, then it becomes pretty easy to kind of exploit.
Who's gonna know?
That's true. Who's going to know? Which is always the case. It's like who's actually playing GTO versus who's actually studied which spots, and that's kind of what we're always trying to figure out. Which
Do me a favor, don't tell anyone.
I won't tell you. It doesn't stay outside of the 30 people in this room, Peter. So, but yeah, I would say you can do it with some 10x. I would say if you're gonna do that and only have value, try to mix in like, I don't know, maybe like pick like your like your nut flushes or some of your like nut flushes or something like that, and then mix in some of that into your leading range. But honestly, if you just don't lead at all and you're just pure leading on your 10x, that's also probably going to be good and fine, especially if you have like a player in the cutoff here who's also, let's say, somewhat studied and understands this spot. So there's certain scenarios where like acting based on this sandwiched information can benefit or not benefit you depending on who is in which position, right? So it relies on the other person who also has a strong range understanding the scenario you're in and kind of colluding with you guys together. But like, and for example, if you have a really good pro in the big blind in this scenario, then I would say betting, leading here becomes more powerful because you're taking EV away from a really studied player. But if you've got somebody who's not really that studied, but you have a good player in the other range, then maybe leading becomes a little less valuable because stealing that EV away from them isn't as important if they're not going to know how to take advantage of that EV transfer themselves later down the line. So again, everything comes with context on like who's actually in these positions and who actually knows this like sandwich concept. But good questions. Okay, so we're gonna wrap up here just with final takeaways. So generally speaking, pre-flop, really start here because everything, the foundation of the entire game tree starts pre-flop, is just tighten up multi-way. I gave 2 quick examples, but this exists across all pre-flop formations when it's multi-way, is ranges get condensed, and then 3-betting ranges become more linear versus polar. Try to exploit EV in multi-way pots. I've given you guys kind of like this concept of like this sandwich principle. So try to identify the next time you play in a multi-way pot. Who do I think is the weakest range? And if I'm like the pre-flop raiser, but I'm out of position, am I supposed to be checking more here to kind of clue and let the button bet? Try to identify these spots and then be able to take away EV from the weakest range, and then apply pressure to the sandwich player. Okay, that's it. Thanks, guys. Good luck today.